everyone, thank you for tuning into Team Forbidden's YouTube page again. It is Andrew the Collector here, once again with our guests, now traditional, top 5 meta decks, rogue decks, and budget decks. So, like always, we're going to do this in 3 separate videos. So this first one's going to be about the top 5 meta decks, then we'll get into rogue, and then budget. This is going to be more specifically kind of a collective thing of post ban list and post Legacy of Destruction. Since the ban list came out relatively earlier, I did do a top 5 general decks of what I think would be best during that time. But now, because of the new set that's coming out, I believe this weekend, at least at the time of recording this video, I'm going to kind of readjust everything and do our usual 3 separate lists. So this one's going to be talking about the top 5 meta decks, and like I say before, this is completely conjecture and our own opinion as a group collectively. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into number 5, which I believe is going to be Purely. Purely got one of their cards back to semi-limits. And just the combination of that and having Anti-Spell Fragrance being put to 1, I believe this deck got a massive boost. And I am starting to see a resurgence of this deck in some of the top formats or top tournaments and locals. So yeah, I believe that this is still number 5, mainly because of it's still kind of a one-trick pony deck. You still end on, Purely Noir, which is still a great boss monster, unaffected by everything, and it can bounce stuff back as if it has a certain amount of materials. And if you have the right cards like Kaijus or anything like that, it can be outed relatively easily. But it does have a plethora of hand traps that it can put in the deck. It still has utility in the side deck. This deck cannot be underrated, and it cannot be slept on. But I still think it has a few cracks here and there, which is why it's only on the number 5 spot. The next one is going to be a step down from the previous list I did for this one, but I believe it's going to be Branded. Branded, yes, it wasn't touched by the ban list this time, and it did get a massive boost of Anti-Spell Fragrance. Anti-Spell Fragrance going to 1 really did help a lot of decks, now that I think about it. But we'll get into those later on. But yeah, Branded, it did take a bit of a step down, mainly because a certain deck did kind of jump up into relevancy, which we'll get to in a little bit. But yeah, this deck still continues to be one of the best, if not the best, fusion deck currently. You can use any fusion engine with it. It's still resilient, and you can use it like 5 or even 6 different ways. And if you want to go a pure version, you can relatively make this deck relatively cheap. You just need 3 of, those structure decks that I actually have up there, and just a few extra add-ons, which really aren't that expensive. So if you have a extra $100 or so lying around, considering picking up this deck. The next one is number 3, and this one also took a step down. Thank goodness. It is the Voiceless Voice. It did not get hit on the ban list. Anti-Spell Fragrance went to 1. It did get, buffed in that regards, but I still think that it got bumped when we get to our number 2 spot, but I still hate this deck. I still hate facing it. It's still relatively annoying, and it is kind of a pain to out. But yeah, Voiceless Voice, I said all I need to say in the last video I made about it, so go check that out if you want a more in-depth conversation about it. But yeah, Voiceless Voice, it's still a really good deck, and it's still up to being one of the best decks of the format. Now, number 2, this is where things get a little interesting. It is Tempe Dragon. This is a new deck that came out in Legacy of Destruction, and this is what I believe War Rocks should have been from the beginning. This deck knows how to make going second, and more specifically the battle phase, relevant again. I love battle-focused archetypes, which is why I am a fan of War Rocks. Not a lot of people are, but I am. But I love going back to the old-school version of just clashing with your opponent, getting really big monsters, and just beating them to death with it. It's also why I like Ancient Gears. Sometimes it's just fun to just turn your brain off and let and just hit your opponent really, really hard. And it's no different with Tempe Dragons. Sure, they work a little differently than those other decks do, but they're all battle phase reliant. And the deck, like Purely, you can run a whole bunch of hand traps with them. And their field spell is outrageous. I've never seen a field spell this good in a long time. Probably since, you know, the Tier Element field spell or even the Union Hanger field spell. But yeah, this is definitely a deck that you want to be on the lookout for, and you need to be prepared for it. Because if you are not prepared for this deck, you will have no chance. It will kill you. I am planning on making this deck, so stay tuned for a deck profile. If I'm able to get the deck put together relatively soon, I'll get it out to you, because I do have most of the stuff for it. I just need the Tempe package, you know, which is actually relatively cheap. The highest rarity for this deck, correct me if I'm wrong, is super rare. The only real caveat, if you want to make this deck as competitive as possible, you need Trident Dragon, and Trident Dragon is like $100 plus. So yeah, if you want to make this deck like the best it can be, you need to shell out some serious cash for that card at least. But you can still make the deck without it. But we'll get into that when I make the deck profile for it eventually. But let's go ahead and get into number one. You guys already know what it is. It's still Snake Eyes. Sure, Snake Eyes Pure did get hit with Link Karibo being banned, but that didn't really hurt it that much, because you still have, you know, Snake Eyes, you still have Snake Eye Fire Kings. People are starting to make Fusion Snake Eyes, Kashtira Snake Eyes. You know, the deck is not going to go anywhere until Konami themselves hits the deck. I said that wrong. This deck is not going to go anywhere until Konami hits the archetype itself. Specific cards from the Snake Eye engine. Sure, they hit Link Karibo, like I said, but it didn't really hurt the deck as badly as they probably hoped they would be. So yeah, there's really not much else to say about Snake Eyes. It's still resilient, it's still annoying as hell to face, and it's still number one, no matter what variant that you use. But that is it for the top 5 meta decks of this format. Stay tuned for our other 2 videos that will be coming out in the next few days. Until then, like, comment, subscribe. Hit that bell down below for notifications if you want to help keep the channel going. Consider joining our YouTube membership. And until then, we'll catch you guys in the next one.